It's recording now.
Okay.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, you're
Okay. Um, my name is Patricia Gonzalez. I'm undeclared, but I'm hoping to get into nursing.
Okay, I'm Jalen Leratana. My major is biomedical engineer.
okay. I'm Olivia Murray, and my major is undeclared, but I hope to get into pre-nursing.
My name is Miriam Dang, and I am a pre-nursing major.
Bro, what the heck? Everyone
All
going to
science.
nursing.
All science. Okay, so everybody read the articles, right? Both of them. I hope we learned a lot. Okay. Okay. So, first question is asking, who were the early Asian migrants in the U.S.? Who wants to start us off?
Okay. Obviously just said hundreds of thousands of immigrants from China, Japan, the Philippines, Korea, and India, including Sikh immigrants and Buddhist missionaries from China.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also adding to that, Fong mentioned that the Spanish brought Chinese shipbuilders from Baja California in the early 1571. So from that we can already tell that Chinese or Asians were already here even before the 1840s, and they weren't even accounted for.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I also wanted to add that majority of them were single men, they were laborers, they were middle class merchants, and also with the question it asked who were the early Asian migrants, which Olivia talked about. But I feel like what we learn in history and in our textbook, it makes it assume that the Chinese were the first ones who came during the gold rush. But like what Patricia said about how there were Spanish who brought Chinese shipbuilders to California in the 1570s. So they're from 1570s to when the gold rush started, which was the 1850s. There's like a 300-year difference from when the first actual site of Asian migrants came to the US versus the first big group of Asian migrants that came.
Yeah, and I want,
Yeah.
since you guys were talking about how the Spanish brought, I want to talk about how they brought Spaniards brought Filipinos on their ships, and they were called Manila men,
Mm-hmm.
and supposedly they were the first like
Yeah.
to come over. Then it was the China, because I think it wasn't in a huge amount, so that's why they weren't really talked about. But since Chinese weren't a good amount, that's why they were oh yeah, that they're the first immigrants to come over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of speculation on who were the actual first, but because the Chinese were the first ones that came in a big group, they are more known, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're good on that
And,
one? Or no? Okay.
well, I just wanted we already answered the question, but I just want to add on that the Chinese, they created a stepping stone for other Asian Americans to come over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were I don't know if it was true, but I guess everyone was just shy about it to come over, and then the Chinese came over, and they're all right, it influenced all the other Asians to come over, and yeah, I want to start a new life in America.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also,
Was there
note me if I'm wrong. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So, note me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of them first came to Hawaii and then they branched out to other areas in the US. I think that's what the articles were talking about.
Yeah, that's what it says in
Right,
the
yeah.
JACL one. Yeah.
Yeah, the Gold Mountain one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Chinese came straight to America because of the gold rush, but then everyone else, the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Filipinos, they went to Hawaii and then branched to America. They went to Hawaii first for the plantains and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to say anything about it? Or we answered it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're good on that one. Okay. The second question is, what motivated them to come to the U.S.?
What motivated? Mostly, they all just came because they wanted to find like a new opportunity, and all like there was a whole bunch of bad stuff happening back in their motherland, and it's like I just want to escape it, and I'm just gonna go to America.
Yeah. That kind of like is an example of the push and pull theory that Professor Kim was talking about. Because in one of the articles, it said that the Chinese like immigrants from Guangdong were motivated by the problems at their home as well as like the opportunities. So they were being pushed away from their homeland because of like the bad stuff happening, and they were being pulled here by like better opportunities and the gold rush.
Right,
And
and like, oh my god, there's a fucking spider. Freaking wait, hold on. Of course that would happen right now.
So you guys want to add anything to that?
Okay, yeah. I was also gonna add about the Chinese that basically shit that there were really harsh conditions where they were going, like where they were working at. Sorry, because they had to go from place to place while they're working, and just in America that they could just stay like on one plantation, like you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like they had to move around, and it was easier for them to work here.
Also, I wanted to add like more in depth, and especially since like all these articles they mainly talk about the Chinese and Japanese, I feel like there isn't much we can say about the other groups because like the articles don't really talk in depth about them. But the Chinese, they push factors were like the Opium War, and it was because they lost to Britain and they had to pay for the war. So then they were like taxing all their farmers, and then their farmers couldn't pay for those taxes. So it drove them out of their land, which is like one of the reasons why they wanted to come over to the US. And then also there was the Taiping Rebellion, which I like researched a little more on it. And it was like there was this group of people in China who established a kingdom called the Taiping Rebellion, and they were trying to capture the government, which was the Qing dynasty. I think that's how you pronounce it. And so they were like taking a whole bunch of areas in China, and then things were getting out of hand. So then the rebellion turned into the Battle of Shanghai, and then British and the French helped the Chinese government drive out the Taiping Kingdom. And from that, it created a lot of fear in individuals because a whole bunch of people died from that rebellion and that battle. So then it was like pushing them out of their country and into the US.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, you guys can continue. Hold on.
Of course. Actually, in one of the articles, I forgot which one, they actually said something about what motivated the Koreans. They said that they fled because they were like getting tired of how the Japanese ruled over them. So.
And then also it said like about the Filipinos that they came as students supported by government scholarships. So like they're coming for like better education and everything like that.
Oh yeah, the Chinese were known as the sojourners, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
Also, there were like they like came for better opportunities, and there were opportunities that opened up to them. Like after the gold rush, there was the transcontinental railroad that like hired a whole bunch of Chinese immigrants to come to the US to work on the railroad. So there were like opportunities that were given to them to come to the US as well.
I guess it was just that they were treated badly, that they weren't given like a higher opportunity that they wanted or that they hoped for. So like they were being
a lot of them were like hired because they were seen as a cheap source of labor. Like they were willing to work for longer hours and like low wages, and they were willing to work in like all those conditions that like other people weren't willing to work in.
Yeah.
hmm Like banking off of what you said, um, specifically in the Continental like Railroad, they were the only ones that were willing to handle the like explosives
Mhm.
while and then they were just like and a good amount of them died because of the explosives and like the weather conditions too. So they sacrificed a lot.
Yeah. I guess that kind of leads us to what their lives were like in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to add that like Fong said that Chinese were forced to live a harsh and lowly bachelor life that often feared or featured vice and prostitution in one of his like articles. So like they weren't treated as fairly as the whites were, even though like they worked as twice as hard as the whites did back then.
Yeah,
Mhm.
like when they were working like on the Transcontinental Railroad, it said that the white person who would be like kind of like watching over them would be like hit them and stuff and like abuse them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like they would be well, I don't know if this was like for the plantains or just any type of work, but they were put into like small homes and like compacted, and they would be like waking up at like 5 in the morning, and like yo, you gotta start working, and then they would work till dusk, and then they would have like a white man watching over them and like hitting them just to get them to show their dominance, and they wouldn't even be paid a lot.
Yeah, and they weren't even allowed to like talk to each other or anything
No,
while
that's
they
the
were
crazy
working.
Yeah,
part that I found about it. I
Right.
was like, they're not allowed to talk.
Yeah, or they weren't even allowed to stretch while hoeing weeds too. That's what it
oh
said.
yeah,
I was
Oh
like,
my
what the heck?
god, I
Yeah.
know. Uh-uh. Or what
I
about the
think it's
water? The water, right? They said that it
oh
was
yeah, it was
like
like
unfiltered or like unclean.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That's gross.
I think like they didn't want them to be like talking to each other because since weren't in the like United States for a long time, so they were just speaking their native tongue. So
Mm-hmm.
and the white people don't know what they're saying, so they could be planning something like to take
Right.
over
Right.
and like say stretching. So like they stand up and they could just like cause a distraction and then somehow like someone like say while the white man is watching an Asian like stretch, another like Asian can go behind him and like hit him on the head or something and like they
That's
take over the
true.
nation.
That's true.
That's what I'm thinking, but that could be overthinking it.
Oh, yeah, you're
I
good.
think I also feel like since a lot of them came like first to Hawaii and like they took over like a large percentage of the population, so they didn't face as much violence until they came into like the mainland and expanded to other areas, and that's when they faced like racial discrimination and they were like hated towards a lot more than when they were back in Hawaii. And
Yeah.
I think it's like um just because the way they looked, like they were discriminated, which is like totally, I don't know. I don't really know how to say it, but like I think it's just,
Fair.
yeah, it's extremely unfair.
Yeah, because I think it was in the Jackal reading, the JACL, that
Mm-hmm.
it was so like Asians had a better chance in Hawaii because since mostly Asians occupy the population, that there wasn't that much discrimination. But since when they moved to America, there was like a lot of Asians, but it was mostly a white population, so they were discriminated a lot more over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it said basically like mob violence and the Chinese were scapegoats for the depressed economy, like for going on in America at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, the Chinese also did start their own like businesses, even if like
Right.
they were being treated badly. Like they had restaurants, laundries, and like general stores as a way of living. So I guess that's like a good part of living in the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then they created their own Chinatown.
Yeah, their own little communities. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's what led it. But then I guess that kind of backfired when the Congress pushed for with the Chinese Exclusion Act, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it was like restricting them from coming to the US. And like there were even more laws later on, like a whole bunch of immigration laws that were established that like
We were so trapped.
extended their restriction.
Yeah,
And
like the
mainly,
Naturalization Act.
yeah, that one too. Like all of
Yeah.
those are mainly to aim for Chinese immigrants because they knew there was like a whole lot of populations in the US.
Yeah, and then that caused the Chinese not to have a political voice because they weren't even citizens and like they couldn't vote or anything.
Yeah.
So they basically didn't have a say in anything.
Yeah, and then it was like they created a law that if you're not like white, then you can't vote. But then they also created a law that you can't be like a citizen if you're not like actually from America.
Right.
Like they cornered them. So
And I find it weird that all these aliens or all these Asians had to pay taxes even though they weren't like citizens of the United States. Like the Congress is forcing them to pay extra just because they were like aliens in this land.
And it was like a $50 tax, and that was a lot back then.
yeah.
So, what about sorry, what?
Going back to what Olivia said about the Naturalization Act, I feel like that was like kind of like a slap in reality for them because the Naturalization Act, it allowed, I think, aliens of African descent to become citizens. So like Asians were all like, well, maybe we're next, like maybe we'll also get like to become citizens sooner or later. But then they were faced with all these like exclusion acts and immigration laws that like banned them from even becoming citizens, and it made it like nearly impossible for them to become citizens.
Right.
What about the Japanese? What did you guys read about them? Like how they live in the US?
I noted that they were valued because they were good at agriculture, and with the Russo-Japanese War, like it was a victory for them. So FDR wanted to compromise, but then even like with all those positivities, there was the alien land law, which restricted aliens from becoming naturalized or owned land. So even though there's like positives for living in the US, they still had a lot more like negative factors from coming here.
But I give
And
like the Japanese because like when they came here, they like what Miriam said that they were like advanced in agriculture, and they created like what was it? They created 10% of the dollar volume of the state crops, and they had like over 450,000 acres of land just to be able to like grow their stuff.
they had more women in here out of all the other ethnic groups. The Japanese had more women come to the United States, so that kind of says a lot of like their extra freedom, I guess, a privilege from the Congress or the government. So.
Yeah, and then out of all, I don't know if it's out of all of them, but I know they're better than the Chinese because their population in America were able to grow. Like the Japanese were able to have kids, like their population is like skyrocketing.
Right, like as the Chinese population declined, the Japanese population increased because the Chinese were getting like discriminated and everything.
Yeah. What about the Filipinos? What do you guys have to say about them and how their lives were like?
They came when they were young. They were like
Yeah.
They're like 16, right?
Yeah, I was like 16 to like 20 something, and they were mostly single men, and I think it was in the Fong one where that for every like 14 Filipino men, there's only one Filipino girl, Filipina. So I was like, that's pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm. They were mainly union organizers, right?
Yeah. Or like
Yeah.
railroad porters and manufacturers.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're more like labor work.
Yeah, I actually want to give an example of like a union organizer, which was I don't know if you guys know this person. It was Larry Itliong. He worked with Cesar Chavez to fight for the civil rights of like labor back then. So he was like an example of one of the union organizers back in like the 19 something. I forgot what 19, but yeah. So. Okay, so how do you guys feel about the Asian Indians and like what their lives are also like in here?
I feel that they were like everyone else. They like made a name for themselves. They did like all types of works. Like they're mostly farm workers, but then they wanted to like be a citizen, but then they weren't allowed to, or they were allowed to, but then later on the white people were like, nah, and so they took it away from them. Oh, you're not gonna be a citizen anymore.
Yeah. The Supreme Court like took away that rule saying that they weren't white enough to be under the Naturalization Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even though they like countered with like, oh, my skin is actually lighter than the average white man's skin, so I should be able to. I'm technically white, but then they said like, by definition, you're not. So we're not gonna give you a citizenship. It's pretty stupid.
Mm-hmm.
What about the cases?
Oh, I want to talk about I think it was the United States versus Hall, where they were saying like
Oh, sorry to
they.
interrupt. I think it was People versus Hall.
Oh, okay. Oh, whatever.
Oh wait, no,
People,
George. Oh, People versus Hall. Sorry.
you're good. So people versus Hall, like they didn't. No, no, no. It was a case where a white man murdered a Chinese person, but then there was three Chinese people who were gonna testify, but they didn't allow them to speak in the court. So like they let the guy go.
Yeah, the case just eventually got overruled by the court. So I think a case that was inspiring was I think it was in the Fong article, and it was talking about how like even with all of like everything going on, Asians were still hiring lawyers and they even went to court. And there was this one court case which I think is I don't think I'm gonna say this properly. Yik Wu versus Hopkins, and it was like I think he owned like a laundry kind of business,
Oh
and
yeah,
yeah, the Supreme Court ruled that there was no reason for him to be denied having a business just because he was considered like competition. So I think the fact that they like still kind of like push through everything and even went to court is like very motivational.
yeah, and then banking of what you said, it was on that specific court case. It was really stupid because um, just because of their laundry mat was made out of wood, like the government were like, no, you can't because you're made out of wood. You're like your laundry place is made out of wood, but there were multiple like white owned laundromats made out of wood that were allowed to keep on going. But since I guess they're Chinese, they're being racist and like, nah.
Mm-hmm.
It was just basically another example of how the whites unfairly treated the Asians, for starting
Yeah.
their own business and rising above their station from when they got here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have anything else to say? Okay, well, I'm gonna ask this random question.
What happened? You were breaking up.
Oh yeah. Okay, am I good? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So, being as Asians as we are, how do you guys feel about? How do you guys feel, about reading these articles?
Okay, I'll go. I'm just gonna say like it's really shocking because it's like as we were saying earlier, it's something that hasn't really brought to light. Like not a lot of people know that how they were treated so badly, and I don't know. It's just like it's really interesting to me how they were treated so badly, and a lot of people don't know about history.
I also agree with you, Olivia. And I wanted to add that in Fong's article, he had an introduction section where he was talking about, I think it was someone who became Miss America in 2001, but she wasn't given credit for being an Asian American. They like considered her as Hawaiian. So even if Asians like got fame or if they had a standing ovation, they weren't given credit for being Asians. They were just considered American. And I feel like they faced a lot of discrimination back in the 1800s, but this was in 2000s, which is like 200 years after. So it's like still shocking how much discrimination Asians are still facing.
Yeah, because like even though this was like in the 1800s, it's still continuing on today. Like this coronavirus started, a lot of Asians were like getting a whole bunch of heat because, oh, go back to your like home country. You gave this like you brought the corona here. Go back. We don't need you. We don't want you here. And then like I've seen so many like videos where like they would just bash on them, just like
or like physically like beat them up too. And then that's something that like a lot of people don't know about too.
Yeah.
And like no hate to like every other race that has gotten like discrimination, like mad respect to them, and their cause is just as important as the Asian one. But I feel like the Asians are overlooked a lot on discrimination.
I feel that too. Like we aren't noticed enough for all the good stuff, that Asians do for everybody else, even from back then to today. Like Jalen said, that like Asians are mainly overlooked. Do you have any last final words?
It's a real
you guys like reading the article?
Eye opener.
Yeah. It kind of, I like reading it. It was very informative. Okay.
Good job, guys.
Thank you. Yay.